John Gill, Revelations, chapter 2, verse 13. Exposition of the New Testament in 3 volumes in which the sense of the sacred text is given. Doctrinal and practical truths are set in a plain and easy light. Difficult places explained, seeming contradictions reconciled, and whatever is material in the various readings in several Oriental versions is observed. The whole illustrated with notes taken from the most ancient Jewish writings, Volume 3 by John Gill, printed in London in 1748. Revelations 2, verse 13. I know thy works, etc., both good and bad, and which in that pure part of this church were opposed to growing corruptions of Antichrist, were for the most part good. And where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. Pergamos was a city very much given to idolatry. Here Satan reigned while it was pagan, and so was a seat, emblem of the idolatrous Church of Rome. Pausanias, Pausanias, says the country the Pergamese inhabited was sacred to the Cabiri, that's Cabiri, the chief gods of the heathens. And the same writer observes that Aesculapius particularly was worshipped at Pergamos, and hence he is called by Moshe the Pergamene god. To his temple here, men used to go to different parts of the world for cure of diseases. Hence, this Antinous, the empire went for such a purpose. A Herodian relates, and this being a common thing. Hence, Lucian scoffingly says that Aesculapius had a apocryphal shop at Pergamos, as Rome and its dominion were the principal seat of the church in this period of time. It may well be called Satan's seat or throne, not only because it had been the seat of the Roman emperors, the 10-horned and the 7-headed beast. Chapter 13, verse 2. But because it was the seat of Antichrist, which the great dragon Satan gave him, whose coming was after the working of Satan, and he was influenced by him, and who, like Satan, exalted himself above all that is called God, yea, placed himself in the temple of God, the church, as God, showing himself to be God, assuming that power to himself that only belonged to God. Moreover, he may be called so for his enmity and malice against the saints, and for his art and subtlety and insidious methods, to ensnare and destroy them. Now to dwell where such a one has his seat, his throne has a kingdom, power and authority, must be very uncomfortable, as well as dangerous, and required great care, circumspections, and prudency, how to behave. And yet to the commendation of this church it is said, and thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith. Pure members of this church are the 2 witnesses, which rose up at the beginning of the apostasy of Rome, and bore the testimony against it, and for the truth, and continue to do so, amidst all the corruption and persecution of that state. These are the 2 olive trees that through the golden pipes of the word and ordinances empty the golden oil of gospel truths out of themselves, pure and incorrupt, and the 2 candlesticks that hold forth the light of the gospel in the darkest times of popery. These held fast the name of Christ, or the gospel, and denied not, but confessed the doctrinal of faith in the worst of times. they had the truths of the gospel in their possession, which were clear and valuable to them. And whereas there was danger of losing them, they held them fast with great courage. And strength through the greater number was against them, and they were attended with reproach and persecution, even in those days where Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. Antipas is the proper name of the man. So a son of Herod was called, even he that beheaded John and mocked Christ. And there might be a man of this name at Pergamos, that might suffer martyrdom for the gospel of Christ, and who was an emblem of the confessors, witnesses, and martyrs that suffered for Christ in this period of time, though through much opposition. 656. To the popes of Rome. For Antipas is the contradiction of Antipater, Antipater, and is the same with Antipas, or Antipapas, that's two P's, which signifies one that is against the Pope, an opposer of the Holy Father, and so intends all those that made head against him upon his rising and revelation. And when he assumed the power, he did to himself, such as the Waldenses, Waldenses, and Albigenses, particularly, who set themselves against him, openly declared that the Pope was Antichrist and that his government was tyrannical, and his doctrines the doctrines of devils, abominable and fabulous, bore a faithful testimony against all his corruptions and interventions, and became martyrs in the cause of Christ, many thousands of them being slain for his sake within the dominions of this firstborn of Satan. The Alexandrian copy reads Antipas, Anteipas, and his name is left out in the Syriac and Arabic versions, unquote. End of John Gill, Revelation, chapter 2, verse 13. This is brought to you by Discovering the Scriptures, being read directly out of the ancient texts by Dr. Peter John. John Gill, Revelation chapter 2, verse 14. Reading from the exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse. Quote, "But I have a few things against thee. The members of this church, before their open separation from the apostasy, who still continued in the communion of the corrupt church of Rome, though they demonstrated against the errors and evil practices that crept in, and so were a stumbling block and a snare to others to join in their idolatry and superstition. Because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. Which latter was in order to the former the instruction Balaam gave to Balak, which is here called his doctrine, was that Balak should get some of the most beautiful women in his kingdom to ply the men of Israel, and draw them into uncleanness, and so to idolatry, by which means, God being angry with them, he might get an advantage over them, that the Israelites did commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and eat things sacrificed to idols, and bow down to Baal Peor, is certain." Numbers chapter 25, verse 1. From the King James Bible, quote, "And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab," unquote. But that this was brought about through the counsel of Balaam is not so plainly expressed, though it is hinted at in Numbers chapter 31, verse 15. King James Bible, quote, "And Moses said unto them, have ye saved all the women alive? Unquote. In verse 16, quote, behold, these caused the children of Israel, through the counsel of Balaam, to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Unquote. Continuing, but the Jewish writers are very express about this matter. Jonathan ben Uzzah, one of the Targumists on Numbers 24, verse 14, has these words of Balaam, quote, come, and I will counsel thee, speaking to Balak, go and set up inns and place in them whorish women to sell food and drink at low price. And this people will come and eat and drink and be drunken, and will lie with them and deny their God, and they will be quickly delivered into thy hands, and many of them shall fall. This now was the stumbling block he taught Balak to lay before them, and elsewhere it is said that Balaam the wicked gave counsel to Balak, the son of Zippor, to counsel the Israelites to fall by the sword. He said to them, the God of this people hates whoredom. Cause thy daughters to commit whoredom with them, and ye shall rule over them. Unquote. And then they go on to relate how they built shops and placed an old woman without and a young woman within. And when the Israelites came to buy, how well they used them, and what familiarity they admitted them to, how they made them drink of animatus wine, which inclined to lust, and when the signified their desires obliged them to worship Baal Peor and renounce the law of Moses. Both Philo and Josephus speak of this counsel of Balaam much to the same purpose. The Samaritan Chronicle says that this counsel pleased the king, and he sent into the camp of Israel on the Sabbath day 24,000 young men, by whom the Israelites were so seduced that they did everything they desired them, which was just the number of those that were slain. Numbers 25, verse 9. By Balaam may be meant that the Pope of Rome, for that name signifies the Lord of the people, and is very appropriate to him, who in this interval took upon him to be universal bishop, and lorded it over both church and state in a most haughty and tyrannical manner. And the Balaamites were those who submitted to his power and authority and received his doctrine, and by Balak king of Moab may be intended as secular powers, the emperors, kings, and princes of the earth, who were instructed by the popes of Rome to draw their subjects into idolatry, which is spiritual fornication, to eat their bread and God, to worship the hosts, images, and saints departed, and which proved a snare and a stumbling to some of this church, as to the Israelites of old, to do the same things. Unquote. End of John Gill, Revelation chapter 2, verse 14. Revelation chapter 2, verse 15. John Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse. Brought to you by Discovering the Scriptures, being read by Dr. Peter John. Quote, so hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. These impure heretics sprung up in the time of the Apostolic Church, but their doctrines were not received, and their deeds were hated. See Revelation 2, verse 6. This seems to design the doctrines of the Church of Rome, which in this period took place, which forbid marriage to the priests, and recommended celibacy and virginity to others also, which were the source of all uncleanness and abominable lust, for which pardons and indulgences were given, and in process of time brothel houses were set up and licensed and encouraged by authority. Which thing I hate, the doctrine of these men, as well as their deeds. Unquote. Footnote from the reader. I need to let you know this, because I know this because I've studied it. Pardons and indulgences from the Roman Catholic Church were invented by the popes during their time to help pay the great debt that they incurred when they had people like Michelangelo and other great artists come in and paint murals on the wall and sculpture David and things like that for them. So in order to pay for all their art and artists, they came up with these things of, we'll give you pardons and indulgences, which you can buy in advance or afterwards by paying money, and we'll grant you the forgiveness of your sin. This way you can go ahead and buy your pardon or your indulgence, and then go ahead and sin, because you know you're going to be forgiven because you paid the money to the Church of Rome. If that isn't so pagan and against Scripture, I don't know what is. But that's something which they did then, and even today, they're still teaching things like forbidden priests to marry, which is now in this century, in the last century, has brought to light how many thousands of Roman priests are taking advantage of the boys and having such unclean and abominable sex acts with them that it's all over the news. And it's just repulsive. They stopped him from marrying in the 1400s to present date, and that was never intended in Scriptures. So pardons, indulgences, praying to saints, forbidding to marry to the priest, for the priest, and all that kind of garbage is just something that's not from the Bible, and it is definitely pagan, and it's something that the Roman Catholic Church promoted, promotes, and still cast this kind of sins onto their followers and for the world to see. So, of course, this is why God hates this. End of the footnote. John Gill, Exposition of the entire Bible, Revelation chapter 2, verse 16. Quote, "Repent. This is said to those who were truly godly in those times, but still retained their communion with these corrupt men, and had not, as yet, separated from them, nor had they protested against these evil doctrines and practices, at least but very coldly, and had too much contrived at them, and therefore are called upon to repent of their lukewarmness, negligence, and sinful compliancy. Or else I will come unto thee quickly, in a providential way, to rebuke or chastise for such remissiousness, indifferency, and evil communication, and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Of this sword, see my writings on Revelation chapter 1, verse 16. It is observable that Christ does not say, I will fight against thee, the true members of his mystical body, though lax and sublime. For Christ does not fight against his people, but for them. But he says, I will fight against them, the Balaamites, the Nicolaitans, for their idolatry and uncleanliness. Unquote. End of John Gill, Revelation chapter 2, verse 16. John Gill, Exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse. Revelation chapter 2, verse 17. He that hath an ear, let him hear. See my note on Revelation 2:7. That overcometh the Balaamites, the Nicolaitans, and do not give in to the doctrines and practices of the one or of the other, whatever persecution and trouble he meets with, and endures on that account, will I give to eat of the hidden manna, in opposition to eating things sacrificed to idols refused by him. The allusion is to the manna which the Israelites ate of in the wilderness, which may be called hidden, either because they knew not what it was when they first saw it, or because it was laid up in a golden pot and put in the most holy place, where it was secret, and none but the high priest could see it, and who entered there but once a year, or rather because it was at first hidden under the dew. For according to the account the Jews give of it, a dew first fell upon the ground, then the manna upon that, and then another dew upon the manna, so that there was a dew under it, and a dew over it, in so much that it was as if it was hidden, laid up, they said, in a box or a chest. And they supposed the manna had respect to things future, and to expect it in the times of the Messiah. They say, as the first, so the last Redeemer will cause manna to descend from heaven, and the clouds are by them reckoned the mills which will grind manna for the righteous in the world to come. Yea, they speak of hidden manna as the food of the righteous, the very phrase here used. Now this being the food of the children of Israel in the wilderness is very fitly mentioned here, since the church in this period of time in which Antichrist arose was obliged to flee into the wilderness and there abide during his reign, and where she is nourished with this hidden manna, by which may be meant the gospel, which is soul quickening, comforting, strengthening, and satisfying food, by which the saints are nourished up unto everlasting life, and which is hid into the world, which the men of it know nothing of, and especially Jesus Christ, the sum and substance of it, may be meant, and that secret spiritual consolation enjoyed in communion with him, and by eating him or feeding by faith upon him. In what respect Christ may be compared to manna. See my note on John 6:32. And he may be said to be hidden, because he is unknown to men until revealed, and is wholly hidden from carnal and unregenerate men, is enjoyed only by believers, and it may denote the private way in which the true church of Christ had communion with him in his word and ordinances in the wilderness, and during the dark times of popery. Philo the Jew often interprets the manna by the Logos, the Word of God, the most ancient Word of God, and will give him a white stone. The phrase to add a white stone with the Latins is used to give one's approbation of anything, and could it be applied here, might signify the approbation Christ gives of his church and people here, amidst the testimonies they bear and the persecutions they endure for his name's sake, and that which he will give of them before his Father, angels, and men at the last day. White stones were used as various accounts. The Grecians used them to mark good or lucky days with them, as they called them, and could the allusion be thought to be to this custom, the sense would be that Christ promises to his people that overcome happy days after the times of popish darkness and persecution were over. White stones were also given to the conquerors in the Olympic Games with their names upon them and the value of the prize they won. And here applied may respect the crown of life and glory given to them who are more than conquerors through Christ, with their right and title to it and the excellency of it. The Romans in judgment used to give their suffrages for condemnation by casting black stones into the urine, and for absolution, white stones, to which Ovid had respect when he says, "This is thought by many to be referred to here, and may denote that though the pure members of Christ, and who abhorred and protested against the abomination of the Church of Rome, were charged with heresy and schism and whatnot, yet Christ would absolve them and justify them from all those charges. But rather the allusion is to a custom among the Jews, who used to examine the priests and Levites before they went to their service, or to the Sanhedrin to judge and pass sentence, whether their ways and works were right, and if they were as they should be, they gave them the stone of the sanctuary. If not, they might not enter on business, as it is said. And of Levi he said, Thy Urim and thy Thummim be with the Holy One. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 8. Now in the Urim and Thummim, the stones of the high priest's breastplate, were engraven the names of the children of Israel, as the Jews say. The name Jehovah, to which references may be had in the following clause, and may denote that the church, though in the wilderness, is regarded by Christ as bore upon his heart and cared for by him, and also the spotless purity in him and justification by him. Footnote from the reader. The statement that Ovid was recorded to say, it's in Latin. I can't read it. End of the footnote. And in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saying, He that receiveth by this name may be meant either the name of Jehovah, our righteousness, which is the name both of Christ and of his church. Jeremiah 23:6, or the name of a child of God, sometimes called a new name, see Isaiah 56:5, and so designs the blessing of adoption. This may be said to be a new name because renewed, manifested to, and put upon the people of God when they are made new creatures, though provided in predestination and in the covenant of grace from eternity, and because of a renowned and excellent one, better than that of the sons and daughters of the greatest prince on earth, and because the wonderful one, being an instance of amazing love and grace, is that no man knoweth, but the receiver of and the Father of these adopted ones is unknown to natural men, and so is Christ, though through whom this blessing is bestowed, the Spirit of God also, who witnesses to it, and the persons they enjoy in the blessing itself, and the inheritance to which they are adopted. And this new name being on the white stone may show that the blessings of justification and adoption, though they are two distinct ones, yet they are inseparable, they go together, and both give a right to the heavenly inheritance, and they are also, as well as the hidden manna, gifts of free grace, and not owing to the works and merits of men, and are given by Christ, and in and through him. At Rome, some white stones have been dug up, some lesser, some greater, with names and letters, and others engraved upon them, which Pignorius has given the figures of, and to such some have thought the allusion here is, and may serve to illustrate this passage. The Ethiopic version, instead of a white stone, reads, a famous book, unquote. End of Revelation, chapter 2, verse 17. Revelations chapter 2, verse 18, John Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse. Being read by Dr. Peter John, brought to you by Discovering Scriptures. Quote, and unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, of the city of Thyatira, see my note in Revelation chapter 1, verse 11. A church was formed here very likely by the Apostle Paul. Lydia was a native of this place who and her household were converted and baptized by him at Philippi. Acts chapter 16, verse 14. Through Epiphanius, Epiphanius, seems to grant that some heretics objected to the authority of this book, that there was no church at Thyatira when this letter was written. However, it is true, there was one in the 2nd century, as the same writer observes, since, as he relates, it was overrun by it's Cataphrygian heresy. And in the 4th century, there was a bishop from Thyatira in the Council of Nice. And even in the 8th century, there was one Esaias, a presbyter, who supplied the place of the bishop of Thyatira in another council at Nice. The Turks have now 8 mosques in it, but there is not one Christian church or place of worship to be found in it. Who was the angel or pastor of this church at the writing of this epistle is not certain. However, it is designed for all the ministers and churches in the interval this church represents, and this period takes in the darkest and most superstitious times of popery under the Reformation. Thyatira is the same as Thyatira, Thygatira, which signifies a daughter, and it has its name as Stephanus Bezertius, that's Byzantius, says, from hence Seleeucus, the son of Nicanor, being at war with Lysimachus, and hearing that he had a daughter born, called this city Thyatira, that's Thygatira, which was before called Pelopia. And Semiramis, which is a very fit name for this church and expresses the effeminacy of it, when the Virgin Mary, whom the Romanists called the daughter of God, was more worshipped than her son, and was not only made a partner with him in the business of salvation, but even set above him, when there was such swarms of monks and friars and religious orders of several sorts as Franciscans and Dominicans, who claimed her as their patroness, when such numbers of them clad themselves in culls and long garments that they looked more like women in hoods and petticoats than really men. Hence also the corrupt part of this church is signified by the woman Jezebel, the daughter of Ethabel, that's Ethbal, the Zidonian. And it should not be forgot that there was once a she-pope, a woman that sat in the papal church, a whore in a literal sense, wherefore Antichrist, or the popes of Rome, are fitly called the great whore, the mother of harlots. Mr. Daubuz observes that the first Christian of Thyatira was a woman, and the false prophets, which first enticed the Christians to apostasy in this church, were men as Maximilia, Quintilia, and Basilica. To which I would add that according to Epiphilius, that among those heretics in which swallowed up this church, their bishops were women, and so were their presbyters or elders. And Dr. Smith is of opinion that the inhabitants of this place were, when heathen, were worshippers of the goddess Diana, so that, upon all accounts, the church here was a fit symbol of the effeminate church of Rome. These things saith the Son of God, who is truly, properly, naturally, and essentially the Son of God. This character Christ makes use of to assert his proper deity as being of the same nature and having the same perfections with his Father, as well as to command the greater regard to what he ordered to be written to the churches, and chiefly in the opposition of the effeminate state of this church. It was time for him to take to him his highest name, as expressive of his highest nature, and to assert himself the Son of God, when Mary, his mother according to the flesh, and who was but a mere creature, was called the daughter of God, and set upon a level with him, and even preferred upon him, who hath his eyes like unto a flame of fire, quick and sharp, penetrating through the darkness of the state, seeing into, discovering and exposing the horrid actions and wickednesses of men, done in the dark, expressing fury, wrath, and vengeance against the Romish Antichrist and his followers, and may also design the light of the gospel doctrine which broke out in those times at certain seasons to the dispelling of popish darkness in some measures. See my note in Revelations 1:14. And his feet are like fine brass. In the description of Christ in Revelations 1:14, it is added as if they burned in a furnace. See my note on Revelations 1:14. And may denote the strange stability and support Christ gave his people while suffering for his sake, when in the furnace and burning for him, which kind of death was much used in those times. Hence Dr. Moore, to whom I am much obliged for many hints in this exposition of the epistles to the churches, think that Thyatira is an allusion to Yuhtria, which signifies altars for the burning odors, as they are to God, and may be expressive of the burning of the saints, those sweet odors. And they are to God in Christ with fire and faggot, which was now practiced, as in the other period, killing with the sword was chiefly used, in the midst of which Christ was present, supporting his people. End of Revelation chapter 2, verse 18.